What's up, Giants fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. And in this video, I want to talk about two quarterback prospects that I think really intrigue the New York football Giants heading into this year's NFL draft. Now, the first prospect that, uh, I think the Giants are intrigued by, of course, is Shedeur Anders, a guy who, has worked his way up the ranks in college football. He's been a really good part of the storyline for QBs in this year's NFL draft. And one guy who I think is a massive sleeper and my personal favorite is Jaxson Dart out of Ole Miss. A true pro, 3-year SEC starter. Both of these guys are awesome prospects and I think really bring a lot of juice to the table. So before I get into the meat of this video, if you're new to the channel, make sure to check us out on all of our social media platforms on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube at Big Blue Avenue. We appreciate all of your support. So let's talk about the trade up scenario, right? Because right now, I think it's a given that the Giants are, going to draft Abdul Carter at number 3 overall. So with that being said, do the Giants value either of these QBs as a trade-up option? So we know they're sitting at number 34. We know there is a comp pick added at number 99. So there is a possibility that they could trade up for either of these two guys. Unfortunately, I don't think either is a top 10 pick, but I do think both of these guys likely do go in the first round of Thursday night's NFL draft. First, let's talk about Shedeur Anders and what he brings to the table and why I think he'd be a good fit for the New York football Giants. We'll go over some of his strengths, some of his weaknesses, and the same thing for Dart. So Shedeur, 6'2 senior, 215, a bit of an older prospect at 23 years old, did not take part at the NFL Combine. He did perform at the Colorado Pro Day. This is a traditional pocket passer type of quarterback. He has insane accuracy. In fact, I think that's his number one trait. He's not super athletic. He ranked 14th among QBs in this class at athleticism. His journey, 2 years at Jackson State and 2 years at Colorado of the Big 12. This past season, he led the FBS with a 74% completion percentage, 37 touchdowns and 10 picks, starting all 13 games for the Buffaloes, throwing for over 4,100 yards. Now, the Colorado offense was really honed in on Sanders and his pre-draft process. They didn't run the ball that much. Pat Shurmur, the offensive coordinator, former head coach of the Giants, by the way, has had high praise for Shedeur. He is an awesome player. I honestly think that these past 2 years at Colorado have really maximized his skill set. 64 touchdown passes with Colorado in 2 seasons, second team AP All-American, Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year. He's really been an awesome college football quarterback, and I think he deserves all the praise. I think he does a lot of good things out there. He's poised, he's savvy, he's accurate, like I said. He hits wide receivers in stride too, which allows for some good yak. And I think overall he's going to be a very, very solid pro. Do I think he's going to be a great or an elite pro? No. But, it's tough, right? I'm not too high on this year's quarterback class as far as elite potential compared to last year, where I think you could have 3 or 4 potential future top 10 to 12 quarterbacks in this league. I think Sanders has a ceiling of like a top 12 Baker Mayfield type of guy, and that's okay. Jaxson Dart, I think you compare him to like Bo Nix. I think he's super pro ready, but and the reason why I'm not saying, oh, Shedeur definitely needs to be the pick at 2 or 3 is because, at Colorado, there's a lot of things going wrong for him, and we don't know if these issues will translate into the NFL or not, but he takes a lot of sacks, and there are some undisciplined pocket throws. I do think he worked around these limitations that he had at Colorado with his accuracy and his anticipation. But when defenses brought disguise blitzes at him, his anticipation was bad. I mentioned he takes bad sacks, slow twitch, standard arm talent, longer release. Sanders is a guy that is, if this doesn't fix, he's going to take a lot of sacks in the NFL. I think with Shedeur, you need a really good offensive line. He can move, but he's not the type that's going to take off and run. He'll sometimes pass up on profitable plays as well and look for the home run ball a little bit too often. Again, he had Travis Hunter, so the home run ball was more successful than not. But by doing this, I think at the next level, ladies and gentlemen, that often creates pressure and it creates sacks, right? When there's an undisciplined pocket, you drop into the edge rusher lanes. And I think that's something that he needs to learn at the next level. I think if the Giants do trade up and get him, I think Brian Dable can work with that. You want to learn how to throw the football away. And that's something that quarterbacks struggled with. We look at Daniel Jones in the past, right? Early on in his career, he wasn't throwing the football away. But overall, I do think Sanders is a very good prospect. And, I'll limit it to very good. Giants top 30 visit on him. Spent a ton of time with him. We know the infamous video of him outside MSG with Malik Neighbors, throwing a couple of throws to him, some catch. But my question is, do they value him at the number 3 overall pick? The obvious answer is no, and not likely. I'm not betting on a top 12 quarterback at the number 3 overall pick. But the question now is, do you want to leapfrog the Pittsburgh Steelers to draft him in the top 20? Because my personal opinion, and this is no knock on either of these two quarterbacks and this QB class as a whole, I think there's only 12 to 15 true first-round picks this year in the NFL draft. Then you start to look at the trade back options from these teams picking a little bit later. You want to add more draft capital to get quality pieces, right? For example, a team with the Minnesota Vikings, they only have 4 to 5 picks, I believe. They might be looking to trade back and acquire more draft capital for later in this draft and next year. So that could be a potential trade-up spot if the Giants are interested, right? Although you'd likely have to give up an early pick next year. And I do think if you want Shedeur Sanders, you must leapfrog the Pittsburgh Steelers. And at this time, I don't think that's possible. But if the Giants do manage to pull this off and trade up for him, I think he'll definitely be a good pro. I think he'd be pretty successful in the New York market. However, though, there is the factor of his dad. You have to consider that as well. Rumors about his dad trying to get coaches fired. I don't want to get into the whole politics of that, but, I do think Shedeur has a bright future and, needs to join a good football team, I think, for him to have a long-term NFL success. And I think he has the right tools to, work well in a good scheme. All right, next up is Jaxson Dart. He's a 3-year SEC starter, 29 touchdowns, 6 picks this past season, 6'2" senior at 225, a bulkier frame. The Kaysville, Utah native did perform at the NFL Combine. He was the best QB at the Combine, obviously, because Sanders and Ward did not perform. He started all 13 games this past year for Ole Miss. He was third in FBS with 4,279 passing yards, completed 69% of his passes. First team All-SEC, set school records with over 10,600 passing yards, over 12,100 yards of total offense, and led the FBS with a 10.8 yards per attempt and 15.5 yards per completion. He was awesome in the Gator Bowl down in Jacksonville against Duke. He threw for over 400 yards and 4 touchdowns. Now, with Jaxson Dart, I want to measure how he does against the blitz, right? Because if the Giants are going to trade up for this guy, maybe with the Minnesota Vikings or the Green Bay Packers, in those mid-20s range there, you have to consider how he is against the blitz, right? Because Daniel Jones failed against the blitz for 6 years. Dart's numbers against the blitz at Ole Miss, and again, by reading these numbers, I am not saying that's going to translate into the NFL, but I do just want to read these off. Against the blitz, Dart completed 66.2% of his passes, 12 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. No blitz, completed 71% of his passes, 17 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, had a turnover-worthy play rate of just 1.1% when blitzed, and when not blitzed, he had 2.8% of turnover-worthy plays. So both of those were better than Cam Ward, which is an awesome stat to have. So yes, I do think Dart is worth trading up for in the mid to late 20s, not above the Pittsburgh Steelers, right? Let's look at 2023 and before that. He's had a long college journey, by the way, former backup of Caleb Williams at USC back in 2021 before transferring to Ole Miss. But the 2 other years he did play at Ole Miss, 23 threw for over 3,300 yards, 23 touchdowns, 5 picks, 65% of his passes were completed. And 2022 threw for nearly 3,000 yards, 20 touchdowns, 11 picks as a sophomore, completed just under 63% of his passes. Stocky build, I mentioned, average physical attributes, but he has good makeup and intangibles. I think he's a great decision maker, fairly accurate. He'll rarely overcomplicate things in the NFL, and he can make those full field reads. I think, he wants to get more comfortable making the simpler reads in the NFL, but I think he's a good decision maker on third down. He recognizes trouble and gets away from it. He's accurate on the back shoulder fades, which you may want to run a lot with a Malik Neighbors if he does become a Giant. And he's hard to bring down an open field, right? The good pre-snap read and recognition, I think, is a step up from what we saw with Daniel Jones. But he needs to work better in tight windows as a pro. And he needs to have better anticipation against zone defense. That's where he gets into trouble. He takes way too long on his progressions, sometimes gets stuck on his first read. You don't want to get behind on progressions in the NFL. I think this is another quarterback that needs a good offensive line, but I do think Dart is better against the blitz than Shedeur Sanders. Dable loves Dart and has done extensive work on him. The Giants will likely need to trade back into the first round to get him because the Browns are sitting at 33. And if I'm doing the math correctly, it'll be between Jaxson Dart or Tyler Shook at number 33 if they're both still there. And I think the Browns will pick Dart out of those two. And the Giants will be left with, do you take a Tyler Shook? Do you go in the trenches again with offensive line or defensive tackle? That'll be left to be seen. Ultimately, I think Brian Dable prefers Jaxson Dart over Shedeur Sanders, and as do I. I think Dart is more tested at the end of the day. He is my number 2 QB in this draft. Again, that's nothing against Shedeur. I think Dart would be a better fit for what Brian Dable wants to do with the Giants. And I think Dart is bound for success when he gets that call. I also think Dart would be more willing to sit behind Russ for a year or half a season, however long that might be. Shedeur, I think, is a guy that is probably going to prefer to start right away, and I think the Steelers have more of that makeup with Mason Rudolph there. Overall, I think Dart is the better prospect for the New York Giants, and I think might have a slightly better NFL career because of how he throws the football against the blitz. Let me know what you guys think between Jaxson Dart and Shedeur Sanders here. I think it's going to be very interesting. A lot of people have Shedeur ranked as number 2. Overall, I think Dart is number 2 by a hair. It's going to be interesting, right? You think outside the box. Last year, everyone had Bo Nix down there at number 6, and he ended up as number 2 after his rookie season, right? The only QB that was better than him last year was Jaden Daniels, right? So all in all, I think Jaxson Dart might have a higher ceiling than a Bo Nix. We'll see. So let me know what you think in this about this video. Comment below. Remember to smash that like button, ring the bell for notifications. Subscribe, drop a comment. Do you guys think I'm crazy for having Jaxson Dart ranked a little bit higher than Shedeur Sanders? Do you think Dart is a more realistic trade-up option than Sanders? I think that assessment is correct. Let's see what the Giants do on Thursday night. There are so many scenarios. There's a lot of smoke out there. Ultimately, I think the Giants end up with neither of these prospects. I think the Giants are going to stay pat at number 34, and I think neither of these QBs falls out of the first round. Folks, let me know what you think in the comments section below. Appreciate you all. And without further ado, let's go Big Blue.